The calling of the counselor in counseling families. That's the subject of today's ACTEC Trust and Estate Talk.
Welcome to ACTEC Trust and Estate Talk from the American College of Trust and Estate Counsel, a professional society of peer-elected trust and estate lawyers in the United States and around the globe. This series offers professionals best practice advice, insights, and commentary on subjects that affect our profession and clients. And now, our ACTEC fellow host with today's topic.
This is Steve Akers, ACTEC fellow from Dallas, Texas. Welcome to part 1 of 3 in ACTEC's annual Trachtman Lecture series featuring past President Ronald D. Aucutt. The Trachtman Lecture is given each year at the ACTEC annual meeting to challenge us as counselors on some important topic going beyond just the technicalities of our daily practices. I, as the 2020-21 ACTEC president, and Ann Burns, as the 2021-22 ACTEC president, had the pleasure of selecting Ron Aucutt to give the 2022 annual Trachtman Lecture. This presentation is a follow-up to the one that Ron gave in 2011. In that lecture, he challenged the audience with what he believed our ethical responsibilities were as trust and estate lawyers in representing families and family-owned businesses. I left that lecture deep in thought, literally with shivers running down my spine about the wisdom he shared and how it would change our practices. Ann and I asked Ron to share an updated version, Calling of the Counselor and Counseling Families, Part 2, which is what will be shared over the next 3 weeks in the ACTEC Trust and Estate Talk podcast. And now we'll share Ron Aucutt's presentation given to a live audience at the 2022 ACTEC annual meeting in San Diego, California. Part 1 in particular addresses the special calling of trust and estate counselors in counseling families.
It's always been meaningful for me to come to San Diego because in 1970 through 1973, when changes in the draft law had interrupted my law school experience, the Navy ship that I was assigned to when it wasn't in the Gulf of Tonkin was home ported here at the 32nd Street Naval Station, Naval Base San Diego. When I arrived here, Richard Nixon was the President of the United States and Ronald Reagan was the Governor of California. I remember believing that Richard Nixon would be remembered as one of the best presidents we've ever had, but that Ronald Reagan would not amount to much. I tell you this so you'll trust what I'm about to tell you. If you ever hear me make a prediction about the future, I want you to know exactly what my level of predictive ability is. For example, if I were here to predict what Congress is going to do with tax legislation, but I'm not. I do have a much more important message. Looking back, though, and thinking about tax legislation, I wonder if one of the reasons that some had good expectations for President Nixon was the way he worked in a bipartisan manner. Remember that? For example, to put together the Tax Reform Act of 1969, which included some principles that are still with us today. But that probably wasn't the example I was thinking about out on my ship. But also looking back, I suppose that while I was growing up in the Twin Cities, I had been prepared for that Vietnam interval in my life by the example of my father, who had been on board a ship with the Merchant Marine during World War II, including at Normandy Beach. And also my mother, who left St. Paul to take a job in a New York office operating a comptometer, which has been described as the first commercially successful key-driven mechanical calculator. You wonder why they need so many words? But the war ended. Mom and Dad moved back to St. Paul before I was born. So I also had the benefit of being close to and very often seeing my grandparents who cared for me, they cooked for me, taught me, played with me, prayed for me. I still remember my mother's father, Grandpa Dave, as probably the most significant mentor and model of lasting values in my life. Another one of Grandpa Dave's daughters, my Aunt Betty, married John Lohman, a litigator whose law firm was a predecessor of what is now Lohman Abdo in Minneapolis. I remember Uncle John would visit our house often, and he and I would talk, and he made an impression on me. I don't recall that he ever told me that I should become a lawyer, but he demonstrated the fulfillment that he got from being a lawyer. And it's largely because of that impression that I went to law school. I suppose to become a Twin Cities litigator. But during the interval after the change in the draft law, during my first year of law school, I worked about 6 months in Washington, D.C., which I had never even visited before. And so Washington and then tax law became intriguing possibilities. In 1974, I was a summer associate in Washington when President Nixon resigned in disgrace. In 1975, I started at the tax firm of Miller and Chevalier. And then in 1976, totally unexpectedly, a Miller and Chevalier partner, John Bixler, who went on to become an ACTEC regent, drew me into his estate tax and estate planning practice to help him deal with the changes made in the Tax Reform Act of 1976. So San Diego symbolizes for me a 5-year delay in my life, a detour, an inconvenience, which providentially became so many positive opportunities. And I had learned 3 things. First, family support and family values provide a great start. But second, they work best when they provide a disposition of flexibility to adapt to changing circumstances. And third, it is important to see background as the foundation of the future. But it's taken me a half a century to figure out how to articulate that. My grandson, Braden, sitting in the front row, did not get me into ACTEC. He's not the reason I'm in ACTEC. He's not the reason I'm here. That is, here at the meeting with you. But he and his cousin, my granddaughter, who is due in July, are an important part of the reason I am here with a message for you about counseling families. My sons, David and Jamie, did not get me into ACTEC either. They're not the reason I'm here. But they are the reason I got introduced to some things like high school and college football games and practices for 10 years. That was a big deal. It gave me an opportunity to observe closely the way coaches work. And I learned about the importance of coaching up. I learned that when a coach was on your back, it was a good thing. He was on your back so he could have your back. He was on your back so he could push you forward and higher. Coaching up means motivating players to improve, encouraging them to bring their commitment and their contribution and their performance to a higher level, coaching them up to a higher level of play with the objective of reaching a higher level of achievement and success and fulfillment. The phrase, coach 'em up, has been attributed to Don James, the head football coach at the University of Washington from 1975 to 1992. But the phrase has been quite widely used, so who knows? It appears on sports academies and camps and programs around the country. It's also the title of a number of books published in the last few years. And Coach 'em Way Up is the name of a book published in 2020 about the coaching principles and practices of the legendary UCLA men's basketball coach, John Wooden. Against that background, that foundation, when President Karen Moore asked me to give this Trachtman Lecture in 2011, I resolved, if I could, to coach up to aim above the plane of my own experience in order to encourage the audience to do the same. I titled my 2011 lecture, Creed or Code? The Calling of the Counselor in Advising Families. My theme was that ACTEC fellows are counselors. Counsel is ACTEC's family name, our last name, isn't it? And our calling includes, as my ACTEC Law Journal that Steve referred to puts it, the fostering, feeding, fortification, and fulfillment of families. So let me start this morning by reviewing how ACTEC and ACTEC fellows have been doing with that theme. Now, I'm not saying that ACTEC has presented all these great programs because I called for it in 2011. No, it's as usual. I have to give the credit to ACTEC for giving me the ideas. In fact, the programs I've listed start with that very same meeting in 2011 with a seminar titled, They Don't Call Me Counselor for Nothing. And I cited its materials in my lecture 11 years ago. A big one was the 2012 summer meeting standalone in Colorado Springs on All in the Family, how to counsel family businesses and business families. I was joined by many of you, including 5 other ACTEC presidents, past presidents, Danny Markstein and Dennis Belcher, then current president, Lou Mazzullo, and at that time, future presidents, Cinda Ottaway and Ann Burns. I had the honor and the privilege and the pressure of sitting on a panel with the late John Gallup and being watched from the audience by the late Jerry Levan, 2 of the most passionate and inspiring champions of these principles I've ever known. Dennis Belcher's Trachtman Lecture in 2016, Do We Need a Canary? Or did the canary stop singing and we missed it? Urging us toward a Star Trek practice, not a Beverly Hillbillies practice, by becoming a trusted advisor, coaching us up. And finally, in the 2020 annual meeting held virtually, there was the terrific presentation of Dr. Laurie Santos, professor of psychology and cognitive science at Yale University, titled Top 10 Tips from the Science of Well-Being. These programs were not all the same. Some focused on the client's family, and of those, some focused on the client, that is the senior generation, on how to develop in younger generations the character and outlook of the senior generation. Others focused on younger generations, on empowering them to find their own identities. Others focused on building family legacies in a blended way. Some of them focused on the well-being of us, the advisors. Others focused on society and social issues. But the important news, and I think the good news, is that we are addressing human issues, not just technical legal issues, in our educational programs. Speaking of educational programs, my friend, the late ACTEC President Waller Horsley, in his president's message in the fall 1990 issue of ACTEC Notes, the predecessor of the ACTEC Law Journal, wrote of 2 themes. The first is education. And then he concluded his observations about education by writing, membership in the college confers its own kind of diploma, and surely education in our field is never over. Then he wrote, the second theme is caring, principally about others. Fellows of the college care about how well they care for others. Some clients want to know how much you care before they ask you to apply how much you know. They are confident that your caring enough will yield enough knowledge to help them. You will find serving these clients to be the most rewarding part of your practice. Waller's challenge, sometimes attributable to Theodore Roosevelt, although I've not found any confirmation of that, has become paraphrased as, clients want to know how much you care before they care how much you know. Caring, building trust, unselfish, not self-centered, but others-centered. Listening, not avoiding difficult issues, but tackling them with sympathy and gentleness. And it's not just ACTEC programming that has demonstrated an interest in such human issues. Many of our colleagues are giving emphasis to those issues, and many share their insights with the rest of us in blogs and emails and those kinds of things. A good example is Marvin Blum in Fort Worth. He publishes by email a family legacy planning series with titles like, "What are your rose and thorn this week?" and 20 questions for your Thanksgiving table talk. And what keeps this family connected? The answer may surprise you. And Marvin's not the only one who does things like that. We often call these less technical, more human issues soft issues. Not soft like squishy or mushy or weak or inferior. Soft in the sense of caring or sensitive or empathetic or coaching up, caring. That's all I want to turn to now. What is there to care about in our representation of clients? Managing wealth? Sure. Transmitting wealth to younger generations and finding the right people in charge of the process? Of course. Saving taxes? I suppose. But while we care about things like that, before we can design the kinds of estate planning structures and draft the kinds of estate planning documents to address those issues, we need to understand what the client's real, ultimate values, objectives, and priorities are. In other words, we need to care. Care about the client as a person and about the client's family as a community of persons. Wealth can play a role. And where wealth is recognized not as an end, but the means to an end, it can play a fantastic role. For example, regular family meetings and retreats are a part of the strategy for preserving the family legacy, as many of the writers on the subject advise. And if so, then a source of funding such as a long-term trust can provide the support for travel and lodging and meeting facilities, recreational programs, and other things that can encourage and facilitate attendance. Even a particular tangible investment, like a vacation home, can foster family unity as a periodic place for nostalgic visits, or even a possible site for family retreats. That can be true even if there's not that much wealth in the family, although again, a long-term trust can help with the maintenance and upkeep of the vacation home too. But we all know about long-term trust. That's the easy part. The hard part is the soft part. The hard part is the soft issues. The hard part, occurring at the human level, is creating an interest in these kinds of family initiatives. Not just leaving a legacy, living a legacy, building and sharing a legacy, identifying, understanding, preserving, nurturing, and transmitting family values to keep the family together and to empower the family to give back to the community. And if transmitting wealth is the motivation for clients to come and see us in the first place, and that's fine. Wealth is not necessarily the root or the foundation of the family value system I have in mind. For some families, that root, that foundation is faith. For some, ethnic identity. For some, culture. For some, family achievement. For some, stewardship of the environment. For some, philanthropy. And it goes on. For some, even political persuasion. But politics is not as durable a foundation, not just because of the cringe you all felt when you heard me say it, but because politics is actually just a means to an end, not a common objective or value itself. And by the way, a better understanding of the role of politics as just a means to an end might help a lot in reducing the intensity of divisiveness that politics seems to have acquired. So how? How does the counselor help the client identify and develop that root, that foundation for a transferable legacy of values? I confess, I'm more passionate about the why than the how. Like many of the things we do in our practice, if we can be stirred up enough to embrace the why, we'll figure out how to encourage ways like the other things we do that are tailored to the particular circumstances of the clients, the particular needs and desires of our respective clients. And there's, anyway, been so much of great value written, like in the handout that you have on the hows: family governance, mission statements, value statements, vision statements, constitutions, bylaws, family assemblies and councils, family meetings, storytelling, traditions, rituals, codes of conduct, or some of those things, and leadership. Leadership both to make policies and decisions and to do the work like planning and hosting family meetings. Those resources that are compiled in your handout lay out in great detail the how of family nourishing. And I will just summarize those in 5 bullet points that all start with S. Spending time together, shedding tears together, sharing joys together, serving others together, and sustaining values together.
This concludes part 1 of 3 in our ACTEC Trust and Estate Talk special featuring the 2022 Trachtman Lecture. Our next podcast will be part 2 of the Calling of the Counselor and Counseling Families lecture, which will dive deeper into how trust and estate counselors can help clients identify and nourish their family legacies.
Thank you for listening to this episode of ACTEC Trust and Estate Talk, the podcast series about wealth planning matters from the American College of Trust and Estate Counsel. To find an ACTEC lawyer near you, visit actec.org. Please subscribe to this series and leave us a rating or a review. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter at ACTEC Talk.